The first time I heard my manager say, "You're a real team player, Mason," I should have known something was coming. My name is Mason Clark. I'm 46 years old, and for the past 12 years, I've been the lead systems analyst at Vectoris Technologies, a mid-sized software firm nestled in the middle of a forgettable business park off I-78. No fancy titles, just an endless blur of dependencies, server logs, and support tickets filed in a panic at 2 a.m. It wasn't glamorous, but I was dependable. The kind of guy people called when code failed, the network glitched, or no one else could figure out what the hell went wrong. That's what I was. The fixer. Every Friday without fail, I'd grab a shawarma plate from the food truck in the east lot and head back inside. My team would already be crammed into the narrow break room, half laughing, half grumbling about Jenkins builds and Lisa's notorious typos in commit messages. We'd talk release schedules and client quirks, like we were war buddies comparing scars. I wasn't anyone's boss, not officially. But people came to me first. They trusted me. And I kind of lived for that. The server room was my sanctum. I'd spent years duct taping that system into something that didn't just work. It outperformed expectations. Clients didn't see it, but management did, in their own way. Every time a deliverable got pushed early, or an outage got avoided without major fallout, I got emails, polite hats-off pats on the back. Great job, Slack reactions, and once, a mug that said Code Wizard in Comic Sans. I kept it because it was dumb. I kept it because it was mine. So when I was called into that glass-walled conference room, no meeting on the calendar, no agenda, something in my chest tightened. It didn't help that as soon as I walked in, I saw Frank from HR sitting there with his tablet open, posture too rehearsed, expression too blank. "Close the door?" Frank said, nodding at the handle with just enough casualness to make it feel wrong. I closed it. Sat down. Across the table, my manager, Valerie, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and smiled like she was trying to fake compassion but couldn't quite summon it. "Mason, we want to thank you for everything you've done for the infrastructure over the years. You've kept us solid, really. We'd be in a very different place without your expertise, but..." Her eyes flicked to Frank and he nodded slightly. "We're making some changes. Restructuring." There it was. The word. Dressed up and all dressed down, same result. "We believe it's time to bring in some new perspectives, fresh energy," she went on, "which means we're transitioning some roles, yours included." I didn't say anything at first. Just stared past her at the fingerprint smudges on the glass. One ghostly outline looked like someone had tried to escape and left a trail. "I'm being replaced," I said. Not a question. She hesitated, then gave a slow nod. "But we're not terminating your position immediately." Frank jumped in. "In fact, we're offering you a 6-week transitional period. You'll be instrumental in onboarding your successor." My mouth went dry. I waited. Surely this was a setup. Surely someone would break character and tell me it was just a terrible joke. "She'll benefit a lot from your knowledge," Valerie added, mistaking my silence for grace. "She?" I asked. Valerie blinked. "Oh no, sorry. Habit." His name's Tyler. He just finished his master's in software engineering from UCLA. Really sharp. We're excited about him." I didn't bother hiding my laugh. "You're having me train Tyler. We thought you'd be the perfect mentor. He can learn the ropes and pick up where you've left off," Frank chimed in, like this was the generous offer of a lifetime. I stood up too quickly and had to brace myself against the table so I wouldn't show the wobble in my knees. "So you want me to hand over 12 years of blood, sweat, caffeine to some kid who just unboxed his first Dell tower?" "We're not asking you to hand it over," Valerie said gently. "We're asking you to guide the next chapter." I didn't answer. I walked out without saying another word. Down the hallway I'd helped design the server alerts for, past the IT bullpen where people suddenly became very interested in their monitors when I passed. That night I sat in my parking space, engine running, hands locked on the wheel like I might tear it off. My reflection in the rear view looked like it belonged to a stranger, tired, hollow. 12 years I'd given this place. Weekends, holidays, nights when I missed dinner with my daughter just to patch a failing API, and they were discarding me like I came with an expiration date. No severance, no bonus. Just 6 weeks to make myself obsolete. I remember staring at my hands thinking, maybe I should just walk away, let the whole thing burn without me. But then something else sparked deep in my chest. No, I wasn't done yet. We're restructuring, they said, creating space for new talent, fresh perspectives. And just like that, everything I'd spent over a decade building was reduced to a footnote in some PowerPoint slide with corporate buzzwords. I was being replaced. Retired, not in age, but in value. But here's the kicker. They wanted me to train my replacement. He'll benefit from your experience, Valerie said, like she was offering me a seat of honor at my own funeral. Frank from HR nodded like this made perfect, reasonable sense. His name was Tyler, 27, maybe 28. Walked in the next morning with the awkward confidence of someone who thought his certifications from Coursera were equivalent to real-world scars. Shook my hand with a half grip and scanned the server room like someone seeing a museum exhibit for the first time. His voice had that grating timbre that made everything sound like a suggestion offered from a TED Talk. We could totally containerize all of this, right? I gave him a clipped smile. Sure, just as soon as you rewrite 200 proprietary functions, reverse engineer the legacy auth handler, and convince 3 consultants we haven't seen since 2012 to hand over their notes. He laughed like I was joking. I wasn't. First thing I noticed, he'd already been given a title above mine. Systems Architecture Lead. I'd been Senior Systems Analyst for 8 years, and never got a word about promotion. So I did what they asked. I showed up. I trained him. I taught him the system. How the subroutines linked together like spider silk. As where the fragile JSON translators still routed. Through an old Flask service crammed behind the main load balancer. I walked him through tarball backups, shell scripts with annotated profanity, cron jobs that looked like they'd been inherited from ancient monks. Every day I had to watch Tyler nod along like he was pretending to absorb it, but I knew the look in his eyes he didn't respect any of it. He thought it was all outdated. He'd saw himself as the modernizer, which would have been fine if he had even a fraction of the understanding. By Wednesday of the first week, he was already talking about replatforming. We could shift the entire client record system to cloud-native containers, full Kubernetes integration. Streamline your patch-heavy stack. My stack. I kept it polite. So, the client data pipelines, the encrypted log harmonizer, the load verification modules, I asked. He blinked. We'd port them, or rebuild. Shouldn't be an issue. An issue. Rebuilding 12 years of modular functions that had dependencies more complex than a congressional funding bill. I just nodded. Later that day, after our second onboarding session, I went out to my car and screamed into the steering wheel. I didn't even recognize the sound I made. It scared me how much it echoed against the windshield. Over the next few days, the office got quieter. Not literally, the server still hummed, the LED lights still buzzed overhead, but the people. The warmth left their eyes when they passed me. Half smiles died just before they reached their faces. Even Mark from QA stopped inviting me to his dumb Wednesday trivia Slack threads. Like if they were too friendly, they might catch whatever contagion made me disposable. Friday rolled around. Shawarma truck still in the lot. Team still gathered in the break room. I skipped it. Instead, I stayed at my desk, showing Tyler how the routing logic for our error notifier was actually throttled through an old script called Lucille, because Derek from 2011 had a weird thing for arrested development. Tyler didn't laugh, just blinked and typed update nomenclature on notifier shell script to error router charvrismount.ro. He was rebranding everything, bit by bit, as if changing names made him the author. What's this part do? He asked at one point, squinting at a janky little subroutine I jury-rigged after a site crash years ago. The code was ugly but vital. There was a comment in there that just said, "Don't ask." Seriously. It reroutes corrupted user logs through a decompression shim before safe archival, I said. But if you pull it, the regression handler loses track after the 4th ping cycle. He nodded. Might want to reevaluate that. Make it cleaner. Cleaner. The word lingered like a slap. That night I stayed late, long after the last Slack message fizzled out. I stood in the server room alone, the glow of diagnostic lights casting moving shadows across the rack doors. I touched one of the cold server panels, like a priest blessing something sacred. I remembered fixing that server after the big outage in 2017, when all the logs went haywire after a rogue update. Remembered patching it through the weekend while my daughter's birthday party happened without me, and now I was simply background noise, a legacy artifact to decommission. When I left the building near midnight, I stopped in the hallway outside the glass conference room. Looked at the smudge I'd noticed during the meeting. It was still there. Like a ghost reaching out. Back in my car, I didn't scream this time. Didn't cry either. I just sat there letting the silence settle heavy. They thought I'd quietly disappear, but something inside me refused. You want me to teach him? Fine, I'll teach him everything, and then I'll wait. Because this system's not held together by clean code or diagrams. It's held together by knowing exactly where it breaks and why. And I've kept that map in my head for 12 goddamn years. Tyler was running a diagnostic suite when it happened. Just a minor hiccup during a server health audit. One of those 1,000-line log reports that spits out more red herrings than actual issues. But he froze. I could see it in his face. This section's throwing intermittent timeout errors. Network latency, maybe, he said, glancing over at me like I was his TA and he had something to prove. I didn't even bother looking at the screen. I knew the signature already by the timestamps. It wasn't a network issue. It was the cron job that handled orphaned user sessions, the one that only fired cleanly when paired with a legacy auth routine, a routine he hadn't touched yet, but was desperate to decouple. I gave him a neutral shrug. Could be. Or it could be the orphan watchdog thrashing against the lock file we buried in the test partition. You know, the one with the single right semaphore limitation? He blinked. Twice. Right. That one. I'll dig into the routine. He said the routine like it wasn't a hand-rolled monstrosity I'd written at 3 a.m. in 2014 based on a user bug we'd never been able to replicate. It had 2 nested try-catch failsafes and a retry loop that only triggered during a full memory squeeze. There wasn't a flowchart in the world that could have captured how that thing actually behaved. That's when I really knew he was in over his head. In isolation, the codebase looked straightforward, but the pieces spoke to each other in a kind of dialect. Unwritten, unspoken. Over time, I'd learned when the subsystems whispered instead of screamed. Tyler? Tyler brought a bullhorn into a library and wondered why no one appreciated the acoustics. He kept pushing reorganization. This whole backup subroutine should just be replaced by a universal daemon task, he offered brightly, one afternoon. Sure, I said. As long as you're okay with losing the timestamp reconciliation in the log mirrors. The rotation array writes those indices using the legacy scheduler. He looked annoyed. Then we should just refactor those too. Be my guest, I said. And I meant it. Honestly. I started naming things in a way that sounded helpful but wasn't a dark art of systems design. I left breadcrumbs Tyler would follow straight into keyword collisions and deprecated libraries. I annotated flag values with synonyms that sounded smart. Legacy sync was changed to primary handoff. Safe unload became thread purge init. All technically accurate, all devastating out of order. He sprinted ahead like a dog let off leash, rewriting parts of the alert manager, changed SIG-term flag traps into exceptions wrapped in retry queues, called it resilient architecture. All I had to do was nod approvingly and occasionally say things like bold move, and this is definitely cleaner. He had no idea that each of those cleanups, unfixed problems we'd solved over years of pain. Then came the databases. This architecture's screaming for containerization. Tyler gushed one morning, waving at the ERD chart like he was conducting an orchestra. Get rid of all that vertical dependency junk. We'll fragment each service as its own microcontainer. He loved that word, microcontainer. Like cutting something into smaller pieces made it more manageable by default. And okay, sure. Theoretically, isolating each customer logic path into its own service sounded great. Until you realized the auto-scaling bridge we'd bought in 2015 had a licensing quirk that throttled shared JSON handlers during peak hours, unless they originated from within the same logical thread group. Newer devs always thought scaling was about width. They forgot about depth. I gave him a week of sandboxing before the QA team got nervous. I'd made sure his test environment used an alias handler that masked 3 of the 4 dependencies he needed for the multi-customer containers to function during load balancing. He thought it was a bug. Filed a JIRA ticket about it. I rejected the ticket as cannot reproduce. I watched him squirm. Not maliciously, just with the kind of obscure joy that comes from staying still while someone learns gravity the hard way. Every now and then, he'd swagger into meetings with a new insight. And I would smile, lean forward, and ask, "And have you tested that against Lucille?" That usually shut him up. See, Lucille was our old error routing shell script. Grew up ugly and got uglier over time. But she worked. We only kept her alive because she understood failure patterns we couldn't replicate elsewhere. Tyler wanted to kill her 6 different ways over 3 afternoons, but every time he tried, unpredictable problems started cropping up in places no one expected. Dashboard syncs running slowly, logs archiving old data as live. Eventually, I told him, "Lucille knows when you're lying." He laughed, but less each time. The tipping point came on a Thursday. We were trying to demonstrate a routine override for batch imports, the one that failed silently if any data schema from 2013 got reintroduced. Tyler asked why we didn't normalize it into the ingest layer. "Because then you lose control of the order of operations," I said. "Schema versions encode priority, not field types. You change that, you risk cascading deletes." He nodded, jotting it down like he understood. I knew he didn't. He didn't realize the system was a machine held together by its scars. Scars I knew by sight, smell, and sound, and he was about to disinfect them like they were still wounds. So when he asked, all eager, "Think I could run a test deployment of the updated batch handler this weekend?" I smiled. "Absolutely," I said. "Just ping DevOps first. Wouldn't want to skip protocol." "I won't," he promised. He did. For the next few weeks, Tyler was my shadow. Every morning he trailed me to coffee with a tablet gripped like a weapon, ready to absorb whatever wisdom I laid out for him. I gave him everything he asked for, maybe more. Explained subsystems down to the bone, even off-record rules we followed. Because something broke once in 2011 and no one ever wanted to see that horror again. As far as he knew, I was the most cooperative exit ramp he could have dreamed of. I made him feel like he was discovering things. That was important. He needed to think he was earning control, not being handed the keys. So when he asked whether the authentication handshake protocols could be streamlined, I tilted my head like I hadn't already tried everything under the sun. "Interesting point," I said. "You could try removing the nested challenge verification. It's redundant now with the encrypted token handoff, right?" He practically glowed. I watched him jot it down like he'd thought it up himself. What I didn't say was that specific redundancy was the only thing preventing the sandbox identity tokens from leaking into the live auth cache during parallel requests. Remove it, and on a jittery connection, a QA user might appear as a client admin for 3 seconds. 3 seconds is all it took. The beauty of it was how I didn't need to lie. Everything I documented was technically accurate. The diagrams were clean. The repositories neatly segmented, the transition workflow annotated, as if I wanted him to succeed more than anything in the world. No red flags, just subtle absences, just enough ambiguity that if he asked the right follow-up questions, he could have uncovered the risk. But he didn't. Instead, he kept pulling threads, reorganizing things like he was rearranging furniture in a room I hadn't left yet. Every time he refactored, I gave a small nod. Quiet approval. Meanwhile, I laid down tiny landmines. Nothing destructive on its own. More like gravitational unbalances. For example, I commented out a helper method that enforced chronological consistency in archived communications. Told him it was deprecated, which was half true, but that little method was the one that stopped the email sync from dropping messages into the wrong client chains when the archive servers reran during daylight saving time changes. I knew the system's weak points intuitively. Not because I had cheat codes, but because I'd lived inside it longer than anyone. The fragility wasn't obvious to someone skimming code. It was historical, practical. The sort of thing only those who'd been burned remembered to fear. Tyler didn't have fear. He had ambition. So I obliged him. I left him a custom report generator for audit logs, formatted in neat YAM with modular parsing templates. Predictable, readable. But between the lines, I linked the output to a clock sync routine that pulled its offset from a global config unless that config was empty, in which case it defaulted to a legacy timestamp scheme, compatible only with our deprecated billing module. Guess what? I blanked the config. Just a placeholder. He'd see it and think, oh, I'll fix that later. He didn't. One morning I spent 2 full hours pretending to be stumped by a backup initialization bug. Tyler swooped in with some prepackaged Node.js fix he'd found on GitHub, already giddy with the idea that he was solving problems the old guard couldn't. I let him, even showed him where to insert the code, watched him test it once successfully and commit it with a flourish. He didn't know I'd swapped the dev and prod variables in the logger parser hours earlier. Just one line. Wouldn't matter until the next full quarterly audit, when the reports would come back missing cross-referenced UUIDs. He told me I was making the transition easy. You've been, like, the definition of mentor, he said one afternoon after his 5th or 6th espresso. Honestly, I don't know why they're even restructuring. I just smiled. You're the future, I said. But as he sat down to write his first big deployment script, I quietly renamed one global reference node to something sleek-sounding, Root Atlas. Had a good feel to it. He liked it. What he didn't know was that Root Atlas routed 6 different monitoring subroutines through a chain of aliases that excluded latency spikes from warning logs unless you did a full recursive parse. I bet he wouldn't. He also started tweaking Lucille again, the script that knew when to fail and how loudly. I let him tinker, just enough. Gave him synthetic logs with harmless error patterns. I think he thought he'd outgrown her, but Lucille didn't like being silenced. When the next dev sweep ran, she wouldn't report a damn thing until everything came apart at once. All of it was designed to unravel, just slow enough that no single change could be blamed, and certainly not me. I didn't sabotage the system. I optimized it for survival under known hands. Tyler wasn't a known hand. By the final week, I was basically invisible. Everyone had adjusted to Tyler being the one in the meetings, the one fielding design questions. I let him shine. And as he absorbed more of the spotlight, I quietly unplugged the anchors, small things, subtle things, a cron job here unhooked from its sibling script, a batch cleaner retired for efficiency, a data scrambler set to treat unknown schema fields as temporary fields instead of unrecognized ones. That one would only matter during a live import. Guess what he was planning for the following Friday? He never saw it coming. He trusted me. I never lied. 2 weeks after my last day, I woke up to 37 unread messages and a voicemail from Nina in compliance. Her voice sounded tight, brittle at the edges. Mason, I know you're technically not with us anymore, but you might want to check the client repo logs. Something's gone sideways. Sideways was generous. Full-on tailspin was more accurate. Lucille didn't bark during the scheduled test sweep Thursday night, and by Friday morning, latency in the client reporting dashboard had spiked so hard it crashed the interface entirely for 2 separate teams across time zones. The first emails were polite. The follow-ups weren't. Then someone finally noticed the discrepancies in timestamp formats across archived logs. Audit chains had broken. Nobody could trace which team had accessed what data or when. That afternoon they rolled back half of Tyler's proposed cleanup scripts, but by then the damage was already in motion. Reconstructing the dependencies was like untangling a spiderweb with numb fingers. One coworker later told me it looked like the system had eaten its own tail. Meanwhile, Tyler had no idea where to start. Every fix he attempted triggered a new cascade of errors. Nested redundancies he had removed to improve speed were gone. Scripts that used to catch misfires now passed incomplete data downstream. The billing team reported that some invoices had been indexed twice under different UUIDs, and worse, other entries had vanished entirely. The finance department hit the panic button. I heard from Steve in DevOps the next morning. Hate to get you involved, Ibiditid, he texted. But do you remember why Root Atlas broke out so many nodes from the monitoring logs? Nothing's alerting the error queue anymore. We had a 0 uptime last night, and no one even knew until 6. I should have felt guilty. Instead, I chuckled into my coffee and typed a stripped-down explanation that sounded helpful but solved nothing. After all, I hadn't built Root Atlas to fail. It just needed someone who understood why it existed in the first place. Without that knowledge, it folded in on itself. That Monday, Tyler scheduled an emergency meeting with senior engineering. From what I heard, he floated the theory that the issue stemmed from my legacy scaffolding. Tried to imply that I had coded things too opaquely, had hidden systems in obscure forks, or relied on behaviors that weren't properly documented. But he didn't say it with confidence. He said it like someone still hoping the blame would float off into the air and attach to no one. It didn't work. By Wednesday, his name had disappeared from the internal Git tracker. By Friday, his Slack profile was showing inactive. No goodbye, no farewell email, just silence. A week later, I walked into my usual cafe and spotted Miles from security hunched over his laptop. He looked up, spotted me, then after the briefest hesitation nodded. One of those long, quiet acknowledgments between people who understand more than they say. "You still running hot on those old frameworks?" he asked as if nothing had happened. "Something like that," I said. I didn't ask what he knew, and he didn't volunteer. We both knew better. Even outside the company, the fallout drifted. Mutual contacts sent me screenshots of recruiter threads, job boards, where the phrase "recent system instability" kept popping up under my old company's name. I didn't respond to any of them, didn't gloat, didn't post cryptic messages. I didn't need to. The silence was louder. About a month after Tyler's departure, I got a call from Janet, one of the more level-headed project leads. Friendly voice, very practiced. "Hey Mason, how are things?" "I'm doing okay, staying busy. We were wondering if you'd be open to consulting for a few weeks. We're trying to restore a few subsystems and, well, we realized some of the older architecture wasn't fully in the handover doc." No surprise there. Of course it wasn't. I had written exactly what they asked for and not an inch more. I could hear the strain in her voice, the effort it took not to sound desperate, and I didn't return the favor. I let the pause draw out just long enough. "Consulting, huh?" I asked finally. "And do I get to set my own rate?" She laughed, but it was hollow. "Let's just say we're open to negotiation." I didn't give her an answer right away. Settled on saying I'd think about it and circle back in a few days. Maybe I would take the job. Maybe I wouldn't. The point wasn't whether I returned. It was that now they knew they needed someone like me, and that I didn't owe them a thing. In the meantime, I reread the messages from old coworkers. Some funny, some angry. All of them, confirming the same thing. He broke what he never understood, and I'd warned no one. Taught exactly what I'd been asked to teach. Nothing more, nothing less. So when I finally did call Janet back 3 days later, I made sure it was early morning. I wanted her tired, busy, with a calendar already bursting so she'd latch onto the call as a reprieve. She answered after 2 rings. No time to compose herself. "Mason, thanks for calling." I could hear the clatter of her keyboard in the background, the shuffle of papers being moved aside. Tension had a sound, and I'd spent enough years around deadlines to know it by heart. "I thought about what you said," I told her, and then waited. Another pause. Then, "Right. Of course. Consulting. We'd like to get started as soon as possible." "So, here's the thing," I said. "I'll do it. But it's going to cost triple what I was making in salary. Weekly invoices due on receipt. No net 30 terms or red tape. You want access to that architecture. You pay for the time it takes to identify, not just to fix." She didn't argue. Not even a nervous laugh this time. Just a shallow breath followed by an almost whispered, "Okay." That was when I knew. Whatever had broken behind the curtain wasn't just inconvenient, it was critical. The bones of the system I had built weren't just sagging. Some of them had snapped. They onboarded me like an outside vendor. I got a temporary badge and a guest login. It felt sterile walking those halls again. The murals of innovation and culture they so proudly painted last year now looked faded, like reminders of promises unconvinced of their own relevance. I caught only a few familiar faces. Most avoided eye contact, unsure if I'd sold the company out or saved it in silence. Janet met me in a glass meeting room that still smelled faintly of spilled coffee. She handed me a printed diagram covered in pink highlighter and red pen. Half the services were boxed off with question marks. It looked like someone had tried to reverse engineer my work after the fact, as if by force of will they could summon understanding from collateral damage. "We're focusing on the client validation queue first," she said. "That's what's leaking randomized UIDs into storage layers." I nodded. "That's probably because Tyler deprecated the null context handler," I said. She blinked. "You're saying that routine was necessary?" "Invisible and necessary," I said. I mean, I spent the next few days combing through old modules. I wasn't in a rush. They needed me more than I needed them, and I made sure not to solve things too quickly. I reflagged subroutines, restored buried functions, and reinitiated alerting stacks that no one had touched in Tyler's entire tenure. By the end of the second week, 3 of the 5 worst system malfunctions were traced back to things I had originally written as hard-earned lessons. Guardrails learned through failure. Things Tyler skipped because they seemed inefficient or out of style. Somewhere around day 12, I found a note I'd left myself years ago tucked into a hidden logging queue. It just said, "If someone deletes this, they deserve what comes next." I laughed out loud. Janet asked what was funny. I waved her off. I charged them for 27 build hours that week. During lunch breaks, I sat in the courtyard, no one used anymore. Watched the clouds drift behind the ugly company logo they installed on the glass facade. That name used to mean something to me once. Now? Now, it was just where the story began. On my 3rd Friday back, Steve from DevOps took the long way to the break room just to bump into me. He didn't say much, just gave me a low, "Glad you're back," as though nothing in the last month required spelling out. "I'm not back," I said. "Still," he said, and walked on. That afternoon, Janet pinged another invite my way. This time the subject line read, "Discuss permanent role." I didn't open it. They wanted me back, I could tell, but want wasn't enough. What they really needed was clarity, and they were only now learning how expensive that was. Tyler never reached out. No apology, no message. Maybe he moved on. I hoped for his sake he learned something. I doubted he had. Some mistakes only teach the people who survive them. As I packed my laptop into its case that evening, I looked one more time at my planner. I had consulting offers waiting from 2 other firms, both with better rates, both referred by old colleagues who had watched quietly during the collapse. Reputation did things resumes never could. Maybe I'd take one of them, maybe none. But either way, I walked out that building with a quiet satisfaction trailing behind me. Not gloating, just knowing. They didn't fire me because I was bad at my job. They fired me because they stopped understanding what my job even was, and then they learned the cost of forgetting.